All right, our next presenter is Derek Van Berkel. He's a postdoctoral researcher investigating geospatial solutions to sustainability challenges with a focus on modeling feedbacks between land use change and the provision of ecosystem services in rapidly urbanizing regions of the U.S. This will specifically include modeling dynamic interactions between forest, disease spread, wildfire, and land management to understand how interacting disturbances mediate trajectories of environmental change, such as impacts to forest biodiversity and/or carbon dynamics. Derek received his PhD in environmental spatial analysis from VU University in Amsterdam, where he developed methodologies for mapping and quantifying ecosystem services. There he also gained expertise in the use of geospatial visualization techniques for collaborative resource management and land use model simulations of agricultural landscapes change. He most recently held a postdoctoral position at the Department of Geography, The Ohio State University, with the Appalachian Ohio Research Group. This research employed socio-spatial techniques to examine forest return, uncovering a complex socio-ecological system where diverse land management, environmental suitability, and regional political dynamics drive forest dynamics. Okay, Derek.
Well, that was a mouthful. Sorry. I hope I'm a bit more approachable than what I put on my request. Would anybody object if I took a selfie of the room here? Anybody? That's a loaded question, obviously. I'm sure nobody will. I just want to put it on the website, if that's okay. So here we go. I don't know if that's a good. We'll see. Well, hopefully, I'll share it with you guys. That's so. After that introduction, thank you for that. I just want to say that we're actually here in Raleigh. I work at the Geospatial Analytics Center. That's just down the road, actually. And so we're really interested in all sorts of spatial phenomena. We say, space matters. So whether that be, what was that? Can everybody hear me now? Is that better? Okay. So whether that be disease spread or urbanization, we're interested in all sorts of these things. So today I'm going to be talking to you about a model very similar to the one that we just saw. I'm going to be talking about just how we do this model, how we parameterize this model, and maybe how you might be able to utilize it in your own work. I'm going to kind of look under the hood, and then my colleague here is going to actually go a little bit in depth. Doug will follow up with some more explanation of our model, which is called Futures. Okay? So what is a geospatial model? I always like to use this analogy. It's like SimCity. Has anybody ever played the SimCity? Right. So basically, it's a computer-aided simulation of how an urbanization, how an urban area might unfold. And then, unlike SimCity, where you're allocating where development is happening, we actually use geographic principles and empirical evidence of remote sensing to parameterize how this might look. So it's rarely about predicting the future. It's actually, we're trying to sketch out what might happen, some of the boundaries. So one of my favorite movies when I was growing up was Back to the Future, right? So, and apparently this was supposed to be the future right now. So Marty McFly was on a hoverboard. And then, so that reality didn't actually come out, right? But some current political realities are actually true. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to sketch out those boundaries of what might happen. And obviously we're not talking about technology or politics. We're more talking about where and when development will happen for an urban area, okay? So why would we simulate urban growth? For our group, we're really interested in the fact that this is a very growth pole in the U.S. I'm sure everybody familiar in the room is familiar with the fact that the Piedmont, the Atlantic area is developing quite rapidly. There's more people coming here every day. I think one of the statistics is that 64 people are coming to Wake County every day. So we're curious about where we're going to put these people. obviously there's going to be new developments, but there might be some redevelopment, some infill. If you take a walk downtown, you'll see a lot of the development that's happening, so these apartment high-rises. And so we're interested in some of these scenarios. We're also interested in the fact that there might be these trade-offs associated with urbanization. So this is a big number. It's $85 billion per year that the North Carolina gets from food, fiber, and forestry. And so we're interested in some of these trade-offs between urbanization and what's, maybe taking some of this valuable land that we have in North Carolina from agriculture and forestry, and looking at the trade-offs between urbanization and these industries, of course. We're also interested in biodiversity and how we want to live with some of these amazing critters in North Carolina. So I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the long leaf pine that is so important for certain bird species. And funnily enough, a lot of the long leaf pine species are actually around urban areas, so we're concerned about those things. This is kind of interesting. This is Asheville, so there's some interesting interactions between animals and urban areas now. So I'd encourage you to look up this on YouTube. There's a bear family that was having fun in one urban area in Asheville. So we're actually coming in contact with a lot of these animal species. And the same thing goes for some of the coastal communities. Interestingly enough, I live about 5 minutes from here, just a 5-minute walk, actually. And there's actually a coyote family that lives near Dorothea Dix Park that we can hear. So we have these kind of interactions between biodiversity and urbanization happening, and we're very interested in that. So futures, what is unique about this model? We just saw an example of an interesting model, but what makes us unique? So I guess one of the things is that we kind of pride ourselves on the fact that we try to capture how different counties are growing differently. So we use some special algorithms to look at the fact that maybe one county is growing with a lot of spread, but another one is maybe adopting some infill strategies. We also have some really important computing advances that allows us to have a very high resolution simulation. So we actually get to about a 30-meter pixel. So we're actually simulating houses and that group of forest that is maybe maintained, even though there is a urban sprawl. And also, one of the big things, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, it's free and open to all. So anybody can use our model. So we put it online, and hopefully we'll get people to actually use that. So another thing that we really focus on is actually getting the pattern correct. So one of the challenges that a lot of models face, these urban models, is that we have this what's called a bathtub ring approach, where you actually have only urbanization happening on the outskirts, the urban fringe of urban areas. But we all realize that what actually happens at the urban fringe is that there's this leapfrog development pattern. We don't always just have development here. It sometimes happens here. And that's because it's a bit more complicated than that. You have developers that maybe want to develop land in a certain area, and you have certain people that are willing or not willing to sell their land. And finally, you get to this place where actually development happens. So it's a bit more complicated than some of these models that we currently have. So how does it work? Basically, our model is driven by population. So we have county-level population data, and we say, okay, we have to put this population somewhere. We also use remote sensing. So we look at how urban pixels change, and we use that actually to develop a site suitability map similar to what was just described. But we use a bit more of a technical approach, where we use different data layers to analyze where development is happening. So we might use road networks or proximity to existing urban areas, and you can actually use different layers in all of this. And then we do add some randomness into it, because we know that development just doesn't happen in this ring pattern. So we're kind of capturing that person that doesn't want to sell land at the urban area, at the urban fringe. And finally, we get this urban growth pattern. And so that's a bit abstract, so I want to really go into what our algorithm actually does. So if you can think about our futures as this computer guy, and basically we have a county, and here we have some urban areas, we might have some forest and a lake and a road, and maybe some agricultural areas. Okay. And so what futures asks, or we ask future, is we have population. Where are we going to put this? And so what futures does is it goes and it looks at the patterns that are existing in that county, and it says, okay, I'm going to mimic those patterns and put them in that county. But that's based on how many people we're going to put on that cell. Okay? So we might have a pattern like this, and then we have to place it on the landscape. And then we have this site suitability layer. And so we might have a very beautiful area where a developer wants to develop, and then we have maybe some less suitable areas. Okay, and then basically the algorithm says, oh, okay, let's try to put some urbanization in this location. But maybe there's a person that doesn't want to sell their land. So actually, it's not possible. So, and then it checks another location, and maybe that's just because there's a policy that makes it less suitable. And finally, it seeds a development, and it grows a patch. So this is your land development that actually happens. And then it keeps track of your population, and that is allocated to those pixels. Okay, and so it updates for every time step, and then we see new development as we go along. Okay, but we're not satisfied just by saying, okay, this is how development will unfold. We obviously know that we might have some different kinds of attitudes from city council that wants to develop in a certain way. So you might have an infill or redevelopment kind of plan where you want to cluster your developments very closely, or you might have a sprawling strategy. And so we're able to actually simulate these kinds of scenarios. And then we also can actually put different amounts of people on these cells, so we can actually grow up. And then there's also an ability to protect these maybe more ecologically sensitive areas, so we can make sure that population or urbanization doesn't grow in those locations. Okay, so this is just an example of how that kind of plays out over the landscape. So we're going to be comparing two scenarios. The one right here is the status quo, and then this one is an infill scenario. So this is Raleigh. And so what you can see is that there's very, very different patterns of development that happens. Okay? So we have a very spread out development, whereas this is more compact. Okay? And we go to Atlanta, Georgia, and this is maybe a different pattern because this is a different county, but different scenarios, and so we see different outcomes. Okay? And of course, on the coast as well, you might have some different kinds of suitabilities for development, and so you have maybe similar patterns if it was status quo or an infill scenario. So this is kind of laying out a picture of just how the model works. But what can we actually learn from this? So we've been doing a lot of studies for different regions, and this is actually for North Carolina. We were curious about what happens to these agricultural and forest lands, these working lands that are so vital to our economy. And so this is 2010 right now. So we have we have a certain amount of ag land, and we have some urban areas, and then we have a people per person, or this is how many people are on these basically these cells, okay? And so if we look at a status quo scenario, basically we see quite a bit more urbanization, and we see maybe there are more people, basically about the same amount of people on our urban footprint, okay? But if we do a scenario where you actually put fewer people on these pixels, or if we grow up, then we're actually having a different footprint for all of North Carolina, and that results in a lot less land being taken out from agriculture and the forest, okay? So that's kind of an interesting result that planners might be interested in, okay? So we're going to actually take you down, zoom into the Asheville region, and look at some kind of interesting, what we call ecosystem services. So these are the services that we get from ecology, from nature, basically. And so this is what actually our simulations look like. So and I wanted you to take note of how development unfolds in the Asheville region. So this is the status quo, and what you see is a lot of the development is actually happening on existing farmland, okay? Because the flat areas are where development is happening, and that's where farmland is already existing. Okay? And so if we compare some different scenarios within Asheville, you see some very different patterns. So the status quo, we have some kind of leapfrog development pattern. But if we compare that to an infill one, then this is exactly, we have a lot of the this clustering pattern. And then the sprawl is sprawled quite a bit throughout the region. And so this has quite a bit of an effect on these ecosystem services that we get. So I want to make note of actually a trade-off. When we have an infill scenario, so this infill scenario is right here, the green, what happens is you're actually taking a lot of land out of agriculture, right? And so you're losing this agricultural land. But you might be losing fewer trees, right? So there's a trade-off. So it's really interesting to see those trade-offs for development or planners. Okay. This is a project that we're really proud of, and something that I've been working on quite a bit. And we're actually helping the South Atlantic Land Conservation Consortium. And what they're really interested in is building what they call a conservation blueprint. Excuse me. And so this is a stakeholder-driven process. And what we did for them is, basically they're trying to figure out where are these sensitive areas where biodiversity is very high and where we might not want to develop. And so what we were able to do for them is actually run some scenarios for this very large 6-state area. And we were able to show just where development might happen, okay, with different scenarios. And that it's not so important to see the changes, but just that they were able to localize these very sensitive, where these areas were that might be developed, and if that was coincident with some of the very sensitive areas that they were looking at. Okay. So how could you use the model? I think modelers and some of the people in our lab, we tend to be strange animals. We like kind of this technical coding thing, and I think maybe some people in this room are, similar strange animals, that you have a good knowledge of spatial stuff, and people think we're strange because we have, this way of looking at things. So we really we kind of recognized that we had to make it more accessible for people to use our model. So what we have done is we have actually integrated into GRASS GIS. So you can actually use and download GRASS if you're familiar with GRASS, and you can run models for yourself. So you can provide your own suitability layer, and you can provide your own population projections, and basically run the model for yourself. Okay. So as an ArcGIS user, I've been able to do this myself, being new to GRASS, and so if you are interested in that, we can talk later, and we can hopefully get you started there. And so there's a bunch of manuals and modules that we have developed, so you can look at these online for getting you started. We actually have some data that you might be able to use for your own regions. And so for some advanced users, what we've actually, we've made the code available, so anybody can actually look under the hood of futures. Okay. And I've also made some data available, so you can go to this website and actually grab the data that we've already developed. But in addition, I think I want to kind of reflect on the fact of how people actually use these things. And I want to say this quote by some other scientists that I've read, and because I think it's important that we don't only just give data, but also that it's an interactive process. So this quote is basically saying, science communication was once considered primarily a unidirectional conveyance of information, based on the assumption that as scientists and other experts would convey their knowledge to the public, typically through data dumps, society would be problems would be resolved. If you knew what I knew, you would believe what I believe. This perspective, the science deficit model, is explored in some literature, and we know it does not work. So communication is not only about speaking in a clear, compelling, and relevant manner, nor simply about promoting findings. Effective communication is an integrated process of understanding your audience and connecting with that audience on their terms. It requires listening as well as talking. And so with that kind of that ethos, that understanding, we've actually taken futures into some of these very cool tools. I don't know if anybody has seen the tools that are actually just over here or on the fourth floor. But you can run futures on this, what you call a tangible landscape, and people can interact with this. And we're actually integrating into this Oculus where people can look at how development changes the landscape. So we're hoping that this is a more effective tool for looking at some of these different scenarios for urbanization. And one thing that's kind of just newly being developed is that futures will at some point be web-enabled. So you can actually choose your location. There's going to be some data in the back end. And what you're able to do is you're able to run it. So you can simulate urban areas, and you can maybe roll back that development. And what's really interesting is that you could actually draw polygons and limit development in certain areas so that you could do this for yourself. I think that's my conclusion. I guess what we hope is that maybe futures could start dialogues in planning agencies and that sort of thing, where you can look at how development might impact the economy of your city, and kind of uncover some of these complexities of urban growth. So with that, I'd like to thank some of my contributors and take any questions if you're interested at all, or we can talk later. You wanted to actually leave it for the end.
We've got a couple minutes on schedule if anybody had any questions, or we can just ask them at the end. If anybody has a real pressing question, feel free to ask.
Clear as mud, I guess. Okay.
All right, we'll start.
Thanks, guys.